Good morning. So I have to start off being honest with you and say that I don't know how many believers are in the room today. We have a lot of professionals, a lot of people that come from different places, all here to learn about this today. But I'm going to be honest with you that I can tangibly feel the presence of God stirring something in here today. So whatever comes out of my mouth, I don't even know what that's going to be yet, because God is stirring in me. And what he's stirring in me is the fact that he is here to do a work. We are living in a time when he is not just bringing forth awareness, but he's turning that awareness into action. And I feel him in me, and so I'm going to assume this is for somebody else this morning too, that he doesn't want to just use 25 years of experience in my profession and my position, but God is saying, I am calling you. I am calling you. He's not using me because I was a police officer, because I have a degree. He has called me because of who I am. Because of 46 years of being alive and having experiences, and of course some professional experience. But the calling is on us as individuals. And sex trafficking, an opportunity to talk about that, makes me excited this morning, because this is something that is deeply personal to me. This is something that has affected my personal life. This is something that I am passionate about. This isn't a fad for me. This isn't the latest. This isn't the politically correct latest social justice issue. This is something that I am incredibly passionate about. And I've been given the opportunity this morning to be your first speaker in the first session of the day. And as I prayed about that, I get an opportunity to set the stage for how we receive our information today. And there's one word that I want us to start off with this morning, and that word is prevention. We're going to hear about the market of sex trafficking in Minnesota. We're going to hear from all the different perspectives, the elements and the dynamics that contribute to this happening in our state and, of course, globally. And I want us to have the framework of prevention as we hear about this. I had a trajectory for my life. I was a police officer, and I thought, this is what I'm going to do, and this is where I'm headed, and this is how I'm going to have an impact on sex trafficking in Minnesota. And God came into that scenario because, man plans his ways, but God orders our steps. And God came into my life, and he said, Jessica, and he's going to come into some lives today and make that connection between awareness into action today. And he said, Jessica, I have seen the oppression of my people, and I've heard their cries, and I am sending you. And whether it came that way or a different way, a lot of us in this room have heard that call. And what he said to me was, I want to take everything you know now. You've got 25 years of working in at-risk populations and with at-risk youth. You've seen a lot of things. You've heard a lot of cries. I want you to take everything that you now have in hindsight, and I want you to go way back here, way back here, way back here. And I want you to take everything that you know now and start training in prevention. Make it the foresight of the church, that these are the things that lead to this. I want you to make it the foresight of the community and of parents and of grandparents, that if we do these things here, we have an impact and an effect on making this not happen. If we want to end sex trafficking, we got to prevent sex trafficking from happening. I want to focus us on prevention, because to end sex trafficking, we have to prevent it from happening. We don't end it by reacting to it. We don't end it by learning about it. We don't end it by getting more information about it. We end it by putting everything we come to understand into the framework of what we can do way back here to make sure that it doesn't happen to anybody else. And I think the passion that stirs in me is as I'm over here and with 25 years of hindsight, I've seen some things. I've seen some things I don't want to see. I've seen some things that I can't unsee. I've seen child pornography. I've seen children in child pornography. I've seen how children in child pornography are dramatically affected for years to come. I've seen the addiction of pornography have an effect for years to come. I've seen and I've had to work with and I have cried with individuals and with men that have held on to a secret for up to 40 years because they were put in child pornography at the age of 4 by their biological mothers, by their stepfathers. I've seen the effect it has to keep that secret in silence for 40 years. And I said, yes, Lord, what can we do way back here so that not another life has to be affected, not another child, not another vulnerable person, another man doesn't have to keep it secret because it doesn't fit our help structure and our services, or it doesn't fit the narrative to say, I'm a survivor too and I need help. What can we do to go way back here so that it doesn't have to happen? And because of the things I've seen, I am extremely passionate about that. So as we learn about the market in Minnesota, as we learn about those that are involved, let's have a framework of prevention. Because if we see the vulnerabilities that exist in a person's life or in a child's life, that put the target on the back, that the predator saw and picked up on, and used it to now begin selling this child or this vulnerable person, why don't we start filling those gaps right now? Why don't we start ripping those targets off their back? If we know what the vulnerabilities are, why don't we as a church start filling them? And that becomes the power of ending sex trafficking. If a vulnerability is poverty, what can we do to have an effect on poverty? If we look back and we see that an unstable home life leads to the target on the back of the child that the predator picks up on, and then they become a victim of sex trafficking. How about we work together to create stable homes, and we work on homelessness. We work on economic stability. We work on equipping our parents and our fathers and our mothers and supporting them. If we see that not having a stable home, and you go from foster home to foster home to foster home, and that target starts getting written on your back, and now the predator sees the target, picks up on the target, and now you're a victim of sex trafficking. If we work in prevention, we start to see the number one question is, what can I do about it? And I want to take this big global issue and I want to break it down to the simple steps of prevention, which would be foster care. And maybe you're not ready or in the position to be a foster home, but you could equip foster families, the ones that are doing it. Call social services and say, what can I do to help support the foster families that you have that are providing care to young people? And if you learn today that there's a buyer of sex trafficking, you learn who's actually buying children in our state for sexual slavery. And you start to see that this is what led up to that. You start to see how prevention way back here in dealing with the things of pornography, dealing with men's health, sexual health, marriage health, educating our young people about pornography. All of this is what ends sex trafficking. Preventing sex trafficking is going to end sex trafficking, not responding to it. As God was stirring me this morning, I honestly didn't know if I was going to get up here and just cry for 30 minutes, because when you've seen some things and you know it's possible to make a change, And you know that you're living in a time when the Spirit of God is equipping individuals and He's uniting us together. And I'm telling you, I got a vision. I'm telling you, I have a vision for an end-time army of God that is empowered to not just do something, but to do the right thing in the right way for the right reasons, empowered by the Spirit of a living God who says, I looked across the land and you may not have seen it, but I saw it, and now I'm telling you that I have seen the oppression of my people. I've heard their cry, and I am sending you. What can we do about a huge global issue? We can realize that it's also happening in our own backyards. It's happening in our communities. And we are the people that can make a difference. When we think it's happening in some dark place on the planet far, far, far away, and it is, but when we think that's the only place it's happening, we feel that degree of separation from the issue, and we say, well, how can I make a difference? I'm here in Minnesota. But you'll learn today, and many of you already know this, that it's happening right here in our communities as well, and you become the agent for change. So I'm here this morning to talk about the overall picture in Minnesota, and I wanted to set the stage for prevention, to get us thinking about not just taking in information and awareness, but really the activation into action this morning. Many of you in here already know this. To get us on the same page and to begin to think about this, just our legal definition of it. Now, not just juveniles are sex trafficked. I do want to say that. Adults, vulnerable people, youth are also in sex trafficking. I happen to teach on juvenile sex trafficking because that has been my experience. That has been my where I've been and where the passion is for me. It's not just juveniles. But for juvenile sex trafficking, it is to obtain and facilitate the sale of a person under the age of 18 in a commercial sex act. Now, something we need to think about is a commercial sex act. A sex act can be anything. It isn't just sex. It can be stripping. It can be erotic massage. It can be videos. It can be pornography. It can also be anything that is a sex act or sexual in nature in exchange for something of value. That's money, but something of value can also be medicine. If you have to have medicine for your health and somebody says, yep, I'll get your medicine if you do this for me, that's a part of sex trafficking. You need shelter, you're homeless, you're unstable right now, you got nowhere to go, I'll give you a place to stay, and then halfway through the night, here's what you're going to do for me. Anything of value in exchange for a sex act. And that's legal words, and that's great, but what is the experience of juvenile sex trafficking? Because our culture has been given a very different definition. Our culture has been given a definition called prostitution, where adult women decide to make business arrangements with themselves to sell themselves to other people, and they have a business arrangement, and both people mutually benefit from this arrangement. One gets to have money, and the other one gets to have sex, and this is an agreeable arrangement. The examples that we've had through our media and through things that we've talked about is that this is just simply a business transaction by agreeable, consenting people. The reality of sex trafficking, and especially for our young and for our vulnerable, is this. These are the terms, these are the crimes that are actually involved with it. This is rape, this is sexual assault, this is all forms of abuse, mental abuse, physical abuse and sexual abuse, threats and torture, things like deprivation of food and water, being put in a dark, small space for extended periods of time of isolation. That's the reality of sex trafficking. Because a buyer's not buying sex, they're buying control. They have wives, they have husbands, they have boyfriends, they have girlfriends. You'll see who they are. They have relationships. They have the capability, the capacity, and the relationships to have sex. What they're buying is control over a human being to reenact and to perform the fantasies, the ideas that they have in their mind that, should they bring up in their normal relationships, are unacceptable. You don't say to your wife, I watched a whole lot of pornography over the last 6 months. I saw this scene and I would like to reenact it. It's going to involve choking you. It is going to involve burning you. It's going to involve some things that may permanently disfigure you. But it's just an idea. What do you think? So they buy control over the person. And because of that, this is the reality of sex trafficking in our state and around the globe, is mental injuries like depression, PTSD, trauma, anxiety, fears, physical injuries. We have kids that are unable to have children now for the rest of their lives because of the sexual assaults that occurred in trafficking. Burns, broken bones, concussions. I think it's somewhere like last I saw was like 79% of people involved in sex trafficking end up in the emergency room with physical injuries. And that's just the ones that are brave enough to show up and fear discovery. This is the reality of sex trafficking. When we look at the United States, our numbers, the thing I want to say about numbers is this, that traffickers and buyers don't turn in quarterly reports or annual reports. So the numbers we have at best are from the research that has been done thus far. And I want to propose this from my experience, is that the numbers that we do have should be alarming because they're at a minimum. They're at a minimum. Why is that? Because sex crimes involve things like the feelings of shame, the feelings of guilt, or some sort of personal responsibility. So they are one of our most underreported crimes. Then you add threats, and the threats of violence, the threats against your family. The first sex trafficking case I had was a 12-year-old girl, trafficked by her 24-year-old stepbrother. And his first threat to her was, if you don't do it, you have an 8-year-old brother. So it becomes our most underreported crime. So these numbers are a minimum. That's the alarming thing. At a minimum, we have about 300,000, and the Department of Justice has estimated up to 3 million kids that are sex trafficked in the United States every year. We have 17 to 20,000 foreign nationals that are brought in from other countries and trafficked within the United States. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, they report that 1 in 6 to 1 in 7 of the missing children in our nation are victims of sex trafficking. And this is making traffickers $9 billion a year, just in our country. What's the picture of Minnesota? Now, when you hear, I grew up in Minnesota, so I never looked at it this way. I only looked at it as my neighborhood on 38th Street and 20th Avenue, and where I grew up. But as a state, when we think about addressing the issue of sex trafficking, our state really becomes a hub in the nation. And the study that was done in 2006 by the FBI determined that we were 13th in the nation. So we were in the highest percentage bracket of amount of sex trafficking that is happening in the United States. But when they describe our state, and how can this be? It's because of our highway systems. We have really good north, south, east, west highway systems. So you can create pipelines and you can get all the way up to the oil fields in Minot, and Chicago and Wisconsin can come over quickly. You can come up from Dallas, Texas on 35, and we have a really good transportation system. We share a border with Canada for bringing people in and out of the country. We have the largest family attraction mall in the nation with Mall of America, and we have an international shipping port in Duluth. So we have the infrastructure for the facilitation of sex trafficking. In Minnesota, about 14,000 people are trafficked in our state every year, and reports going all the way back to 2010 show that over 200 children are trafficked over the internet every month. That number triples, and this was a recent study by Washington County that takes a look at how many ads go up. Ads selling children for sex triple on holidays, like it's just a part of the present, just a part of the celebration, like St. Patrick's Day. That number triples. That's only one venue for sex trafficking of about a dozen places where this is happening in our state. When we look at the age of victims in our state, a study that was done that looked over, I think it was a 4 or 5 year period of Minneapolis cases. Now, Minneapolis was the jurisdiction, but if you mapped out who was involved in these sex trafficking cases, you would see that the juveniles kind of were around the inner city and first ring suburb areas, and so were the traffickers. And when you looked at who came to buy them, it went from all the way up north Minnesota near the border to all the way down to Iowa and Wisconsin and all our suburbs and all our rural, that's a difficult word, rural communities. People were driving over 60 miles in our state to come and buy a child for sex in Minneapolis. Looking at the age of victims in that case, 4 to 17 years old, there's a couple of things I like to highlight that have been a part of our training that are kind of recent to come to the front. But one of those things is the fact that although we know the average age of entry, right, is in those preteens or teen years, that victims are as young as infants. They're as young as toddlers. In this study that was done recently, 4 to 17 years old was the age range of the victims that were in sex trafficking in these cases here in our state. But victims are as young as infants. Let's talk for a second about where, who, and how. I said there's about a dozen places. At the top is hotels, motels, and massage businesses. I tried to go on a vacation with my husband for our anniversary, right? You ever have the great idea you're going to leave work, so you go far, 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 far away, and next thing you know, you're at work? So we're like, let's go far away. And so we said, let's just head south Minnesota. Let's just hop in and go through the cornfields and relax. And so that's exactly what we did. And we almost got to the Iowa border, and the Spirit of God came in the car, and he said, you've gone too far. I want you to go back. And I said, okay. I said to my husband, I think we got to go back. And he goes, yeah. He goes, the more I drive, I'm starting to feel sick. I'm getting a headache. I think I need to stop and eat. And let's stop and pray. So we stopped and we ate and we prayed, and we knew we were supposed to go back further north. We had traveled too far. Now, remind you, this is supposed to be an anniversary vacation. So we start heading back up, and we get to St. Peter. God says, stay here. We find an American that has a room left. And so we stayed at the American in St. Peter. In the morning, we said, Lord, we're here for a reason. What is it? He said, I want you to go to this coffee shop. We go to this coffee shop, and while we're sitting there, these, guests start coming in, patrons, whatever, and I am just uneasy in my spirit, and my husband is like, do you get the feeling you're surrounded? And I said, yes, I get the feeling I'm surrounded. The question is by what? So you got a retired cop, and you got a cop feeling surrounded. It's like, we're going to take down this coffee shop. Where are you at? So we're like, we got to pray about this. We're surrounded, but we don't know by what. So we pray about it, and we got the sense of pornography. We got the sense of just sexual perversion. And we're talking St. Peter, beautiful Main Street farmland, and we're surrounded by this feeling, and we get the urge to leave. We leave. We don't drive but a block, and God says it's in there. And here on Main Street, beautiful St. Peter, is a business with a blinking sign in the window that says massage. And so I go back and I pull up some of my old law enforcement tactics, and I start researching this business in St. Peter. And I find a couple of ads in Backpage that are selling minors out of that very massage business right now as we speak. They just got in fresh today. So tried to leave work, ended up at work. Why? Because our rural and our suburban communities are not exempt from this issue. Back in the day, my parents said, don't go to that neighborhood, don't go to that house, don't walk that street, you're not going to hang with that friend. Now we have the internet. So children anywhere in their bedroom in rural Minnesota are now with their cell phone, and predators everywhere have access to children anywhere. And so this isn't just an inner city issue anymore. And those are the top venues for what's happening. It's also happening in residential areas, in homes, in apartments. It happens at the strip clubs. We're Act United is fortunate to have a partnership with a ministry that is doing some strip club work. And I'm telling you right now, things are ugly. Things are ugly. Things are ugly. Not on stage, but in the back rooms and in rooms that we know nothing about. Things are getting incredibly ugly. Truck stops, floating job sites like the oil fields, parties, party buses, yachts. On the street, but not as much, especially when it comes to young people. Internet and phone chat. A Minnesota study just identified 36 different websites where people are being sold. You have 36 places you can go on the internet, and there's more, but this is what's discovered. 36 places, websites on the internet where sex trafficking is happening, where you can order a human being. Who's involved? Now, this is another thing I like to emphasize, because when we talk about sex trafficking, we think about the kids or the vulnerable person, or we think about the victim. And we should, and I'm glad we do, and it's the first person I think about. But in order to have sex trafficking, we have to remember there's 3 people involved in order for this to happen. So if we put this in our framework of prevention over the course of this morning, and we learn more about the 3 people that are involved, we see that we are probably perfectly positioned as a man in a men's group, or as somebody in church, or as somebody that works with youth. We are perfectly positioned to end sex trafficking by having an effect on the lives of all 3 people. If we have 3 people involved, okay, so we have a predator or a trafficker or the offender, the pimp, the person that has recruited somebody into sex trafficking. And we have a buyer. We have somebody that is buying human beings and children in our state for sexual slavery. And then, of course, we have the young person or the vulnerable or the victim. Without saying anything, out loud, because I hated that at school, raise your hand and say the wrong answer so I can make an example out of you. Without saying anything or raising your hand, just take a look at these photos and just try to put in your mind about where you're at right now with awareness, who's who of the 3 people, or who would you think is who anyway of the three people that are involved. And these are all Minnesota cases and Minnesota photos. And then the right answer is all 4 of these people have been arrested and charged as traffickers of selling young people in our state for sex. The young gal at the top was a cheerleader in high school who befriended and was so nice to a special needs student at her school, and got so close and got so trusted, she began selling her after school and keeping the money. The lady at the bottom is a grandmother who sold her 8-year-old granddaughter to a registered sex offender in Iowa for sex. She was interdicted by police, and she's from Carver County. This is rural farm country Minnesota, selling an 8-year-old granddaughter. And then the guy up top was involved in sex trafficking and housing foreign nationals that were brought into our country and then transported cross-country and sold out of hotels. I think it was Woodbury and Edina in Minnesota. And then the guy at the bottom, he's from Chicago. And while in Chicago, as traffickers can, read body language and read behavior. He saw a 15-year-old girl out on the street, and she was a runaway. She thought the street was going to be better than the home life she was experiencing. She ran away, and she was picked up by him. And you want to know what he said? He didn't say, hey, why don't you travel with me? I am going to sell you to a bunch of strangers that can have control over you, do whatever they want to you. You may get disfigured, you may get burned, I don't know. That's up to them. I'm just going to keep the $150 or the $20, and why don't you hop in and come with me? You know what he said? He picked up on the vulnerabilities. He picked up on those gaps, and he said, do you want to come be a part of a family? And of course she did. Of course she did. So he brought her up to Minnesota, and she was found about a month later walking I-94 by a businessman on the way to work, severely beaten, and brought to Regions Hospital, where it was discovered what was going on with her after a month of being sold in our state. She said no, so that's what happened. So she got brought somewhere, and she got beat, and she got left. Who's buying sex? We're going to learn about that later this morning. Traffickers, we're going to talk about them later this morning. But what I want to highlight, what Act United does, because of the survivors that we have had an opportunity, we have been blessed to be able to work with, is traffickers are also females. They can be male, they can be female. They can be biological mothers. We just got done seeing that they can be grandmothers of 8-year-old girls. The 2 survivors that I work with were trafficked by their biological moms and their stepfathers. They were brought to truck stops. They were put in pornography by 4. They were sold in sex trafficking by 6, by family. So they can also be family members. And we have to remember that in prevention and in the work that we do, because sometimes we think if we could just equip the parents will do a good job, and sometimes it is the parents. We'll skip to who the kids are. And who the kids are, the average age of entry is 12 to 13 for girls and 11 for boys and transgender youth. But they can be as young as infants. And the other thing we need to realize is that there is no race, there's no culture, there's no money, there's no economic status, there's no living on the farm that makes you exempt from the possibility of sex trafficking. And we better understand that, I think, now as a state. But we just sentenced a guy to the largest child pornography case in Minnesota. His victims were 171 high school boys from rural Minnesota. On the football team, soccer team, right? The connected kids. What was their one vulnerability? Education. We do see some common vulnerabilities. Frame this into prevention. Runaway, homeless youth, unstable home life, poverty, marginalized groups. When I tell our young people, because we're in the schools with an exploitation prevention program, and I say, you can help and you can make an impact on ending sex trafficking by not letting that person be marginalized, left out on their own. That makes an impact. For the sake of time, we're going to skip a couple of things, but this is another myth we need to get over, is what does a sex trafficking victim look like? If we think all of them are tied up somewhere in a dungeon we will never see, we think we won't be able to have an impact. And there's still a myth, and I can't believe it, but it's just recently somebody said, we don't have a sex trafficking problem out here. There's nobody getting kidnapped. We would see our kidnapping statistics spike if there was sex trafficking happening out here. And it's like, this is not, I said there is no relation or correlation to kidnapping statistics. This is about the relationships and the grooming that is happening with the kids, building relationships, building trust, disarming them, convincing, coercing, and talking them into relationship. And then saying, by the way, as a part of this relationship, here's what you're going to do and contribute. They're still there. They're still going to church. They're still showing up at school. They're still in the community. They're still going to class. What can we do? This is where I want to leave us this morning. There's a spectrum of response. The best thing about Freedom Weekend that makes me so excited is this is about connecting awareness into action. And one of the pieces of action that we can do is in prevention. And in prevention, we see the steps that we can take to make an impact on ending what is a global issue and a statewide issue. One of the things God said to me, and I love to share it with everybody else, is when you take this global issue and you take this huge problem, you seem so insignificant, and we feel like if we could just come up with something big, if we could just have a big idea, if we could just create this huge organization, then we will be able to end sex trafficking. And God said, remind my people that small is the new big. It's about the one thing that you can do. And that's how an army works, right? I might be a sniper, but you might be the bow and arrow, and you might be the general, and you are our voice. You're the one that knows how to negotiate. We all have different skills, different talents, different experiences. But when you take your one step and I take my one step, we got people in the house here that are called overseas. They're two people that started to do one thing that's now having a huge impact. So as we learn about the market today, remember that you already, who you are, where you are, can take one step to have an effect on one life. And then together with my one and your one and their one, we become an army that is going to end sex trafficking. So I leave you to hang your hats on prevention, if you would, this morning as we go into our next speakers. God bless you, and may awareness not hang on you, but become action for you. So thank you.